Hey guys, tonight we're slipping back into the scratchy sheets of medieval Europe because you've just woken up bald. Not a fashionable buzz cut or a deliberate Vin Diesel moment. No, this is patchy. Uneven, probably itchy baldness. Maybe you lost it to stress. Maybe it's the local water. Or maybe someone put a curse on you after you stole their pig. Whatever the cause, the point is, you need help. And in the year 1342, help means something deeply unpleasant. The air smells like damp stone and candle wax. You sit up in your straw-stuffed mattress, scratch your flaky scalp, and try not to panic. Your only mirror is a wobbly shard of polished metal, and it confirms your worst fear: your hair is absolutely betraying you. A big, shiny patch right at the top. It gleams like a saint's halo, and not in a good way. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and what time you're listening. We've got people from all over the world tuning in to fall asleep to tales of itchy scalps and fried rodents. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You throw on your woolen robe, it's mostly clean, minus one suspicious stain, and stumble out into the chilly morning mist. The village green is already awake, and so is old Matilda. She's got no teeth and 4 theories on why your hair fell out. One of them involves demons. Another involves onions. You trudge past the bakery, inhaling the comforting smell of dark rye, and make your way to the apothecary. He's got the largest collection of medicinal jars this side of the river. One shelf is entirely mice. Not cute ones, crispy, shriveled, and suspiciously oily. You already know what's coming. Bald again, he says, with absolutely no sympathy. You people never listen when I say not to sleep under full moons. You squint. I thought that was only for avoiding boils. No boils is owls, baldness is moons, keep up. That's medieval science for you. Welcome to a world where medical knowledge comes from ancient books, rumor dreams, and whatever happened to work for someone's cousin's neighbor. There's no germ theory, no vitamin charts, and absolutely no regulation on who gets to call themselves a doctor. Which is why your treatment plan might involve things like honey wine crushed emeralds or yes fried mice. This all starts with the ancient theory of humors, a belief system dating back to Hippocrates, and carried like a prized infection all the way into medieval Europe. According to this worldview, your body is a delicate soup of 4 substances: blood phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Baldness. That's your body being too hot and dry. Hair is moist and warm like the inside of a fresh loaf of bread. When you go bald, it's because your head is overheating and drying out the follicles. Solution. Cool it down. Add moisture. Add oils. Add something that smells like the underside of a barn cat. Historians still argue whether medieval people genuinely believed in these treatments, or just used them because there was literally nothing better. But your apothecary definitely believes. He lights a tiny brazier and starts heating up something thick and green in a copper spoon. It sizzles. You're not asking questions. To help rehydrate your dry head, he prescribes a paste of goose fat, mashed figs, and powdered snail shells. For real. He adds, also good for chapped elbows. You get a quick lecture about St. Balthazar, the patron of balding men. He isn't. But the apothecary insists he is and are told to sleep with a poultice on your head, wrapped in linen held in place with beeswax. It will smell terrible. It will stain your pillow. And it will not work. But you'll try it anyway because the social consequences of baldness are no joke. In your town, hair is a sign of virility, health, and moral cleanliness. Lose your hair and people whisper. They think you're sinning, or aging, or cursed, or all 3. So yes, you will absolutely smear frog marrow paste on your scalp if it even might help. Later that day, you pass the village barber. He gives you a pitying nod and offers a cheaper rate for head shaving since you're halfway there anyway. You decline. For now. Your next stop is Brother Abel, the local monk, with a reputation for brewing something called hair wine. No one knows what's in it, but the last guy who drank it passed out for 2 days and woke up with slightly more eyebrow. You sit through a long sermon about vanity. You promise not to look in mirrors again, and you buy the wine anyway. That night, you curl up in your bed, smelling like cooked fruit and candle grease. You whisper a quick prayer to St. Jude, patron of lost causes, and press the linen wrap tight to your scalp. In the dark, with the mice scuttling across your wooden beams, you wonder if one of them will come collect its fried cousin off your nightstand. You drift off head sticky dreams strange and hopes absurdly high. Tomorrow, you'll try the mouse oil. You wake up to the sound of church bells and the sensation that your head has glued itself to the pillow. The poultice of snail shells, goose fat, and fig mash has dried into something between porridge and medieval glue. You sit up slowly, peel the linen away, and wince. A clump of hair comes with it, not from the bald spot, of course. Just some of the healthy stuff from the back. Great. Outside, the sun's just starting to burn off the mist. You hear chickens arguing over something in the mud. The world smells like damp wool and yeast, and your scalp feels warm. Too warm. Remember what the apothecary said, hot and dry. Definitely not ideal. So off you go, scratching gently, heading back to learn more about the theory that started it all. The humors. These weren't just a passing fad. They were the operating manual for the human body for centuries. Your hair loss isn't seen as a unique problem. It's just a visible symptom of a deeper imbalance. You sit on a stool made of 3 wobbling legs while the apothecary lectures like a man who knows too much and has tested far too little. You see, he says, pointing to a diagram that looks like it was drawn by a drunk monk. When you have an excess of choleric humor, hot and dry, you lose your cooling substances. The hair just gives up. That's right, according to this view, your hair has mood swings. It needs balance. If your blood's boiling, your follicles panic. What's the cure? That depends on who you ask. Some medieval physicians, especially those who took their cues from Avicenna or Galen, prescribe cooling foods. Think cucumbers, sour cherries, or a broth of boiled lettuce. Delicious. Others lean toward topical treatments like vinegar soaks, mashed leeks, or oil of rose. You're told to avoid red meat spices, hot baths, long sermons, and confusingly too much reading. Historians still argue whether people actually followed these lifestyle instructions or just nodded politely while reaching for the garlic stew. But we know from surviving texts that physicians took these balances very seriously. One scroll you glance at is titled, "Of Baldness and the Dry Brain." It blames the condition on excessive thinking. Too much mental activity apparently causes heat to rise to the top of the head, drying the scalp like an old loaf. Try not to worry so much, the apothecary adds. Stress roasts the roots. Of course not. Everyone has the time or money for consultations. Most folks just ask their neighbors. That's how you end up with Matilda again. She insists that sleeping with a wet cabbage leaf on your head will reset your balance. She also tells you about her cousin who swore by beetroot juice applied with a feather, plucked from a church bell tower goose. It has to be that goose. Regular geese don't work. You thank her smiling and back away slowly. Back at the apothecary, things take a darker turn. He pulls out his lancet, a long, thin blade used for bloodletting. Too much blood, he mutters. That's your problem. You hesitate. He waves a dusty chart. See, Jupiter rules the blood. Mars rules the bile. Your stars are badly aligned. And here we go again. Because yes, astrology is baked into this. The position of the planets affects your fluids, which affects your mood, which affects your body, which explains why Mercury in retrograde is probably the reason you're shedding like a nervous cat. He pricks your arm. Blood drips into a clay bowl. See how dark it is, he says, as if that proves something. Definitely too hot. You've been eating pepper, haven't you? You nod because honestly, who remembers what they ate last week? As you leave, he hands you a cloth packet of something you're told to steep in wine. It contains sage mint, dried marjoram, and what might be powdered frog. For the heat, he says. Cool your liver and the hair will return. Sure, why not? You walk home under a sky that can't decide whether it wants to rain. The streets are muddy. Your sandals squelch with every step. You think about the idea that your body is a system of opposites forever trying to balance. Maybe it's not so different from today. We still talk about hot-headed people or chilling out. We still chase balance. Of course, we don't smear ourselves in fermented herbs to do it. Usually. You get home and brew the wine infusion like a faithful patient. It smells like herbal tea brewed inside an old shoe. You sip, you wait, you feel slightly sleepy and vaguely minty. Progress. In the meantime, you get advice from a passing friar who tells you fasting may help. The saints never went bald, he claims. False have you seen medieval art. But you thank him anyway. Later, you catch a glimpse of yourself in that wobbly mirror again. Same shiny spot, same skeptical eyebrows. But now you've got a plan. Kind of. Tomorrow the mice come out. You return to the apothecary with cautious optimism and a faint scent of minty frog wine still clinging to your breath. He's already expecting you. He has a new plan. A rodent-shaped plan. He gestures to a jar on the shelf half filled with yellowish oil and the curled remains of something vaguely mouse-shaped. This, he says, with all the gravity of a priest revealing a relic, is the secret to reviving your follicles. Fried mouse. Aged in goose grease. Sometimes with burnt bees, sometimes not. You stare. He nods. Fried in olive oil if you're wealthy. Lard if you're not. Mix in powdered rosemary and the ashes of a burnt hedgehog quill. Massage into the scalp twice daily. Works like a charm. Of course it does. You take the jar. To be fair, mice have been used in remedies for baldness since ancient Egypt. The Egyptians fried them in fat and mixed them with dates and dog toes, probably hoping to scare the hair back onto their heads. The Romans adopted similar methods. Pliny the Elder, who really had no business giving health advice, recommended ashes of mice mixed with honey for receding hairlines. And somehow those recipes traveled through centuries into your greasy little jar. Historians still argue whether people believe these treatments were medical science, folk magic, or both. The lines blur when the cure smells like overcooked rat, and your doctor's also your local candle maker. You take the jar home and prepare your scalp for the unholy unguent. The texture is how to put this gritty. You warm it by the fire as instructed and start to rub it gently into your bald patch. The smell. A combination of roasted poultry, old library, and something very much deceased. You try not to gag. It's working, you mutter, trying to believe it. To seal in the mixture, you tie a linen band around your head. You'll leave it on overnight, just like before. This time, though, there's the added thrill of wondering whether the scent will attract every cat in a 10-mile radius. While you lie in bed marinating in rodent residue, you think about how much effort is going into this. And why. Because in medieval Europe, hair isn't just hair, it's a symbol of youth, of vitality, of social standing. Especially for men, baldness implies weakness. A body aging, a mind fading, a soul possibly straying from divine favor. It's no coincidence that so many magical or medical hair loss treatments involved animals. Not just mice, bears, dogs, goats, snakes, even the occasional donkey. People thought animals embodied certain humors or qualities. Mice were prolific breeders, quick, persistent. Maybe applying them gave your body those same traits. There's even a recipe in one medieval text involving boiling a mouse in urine your own for several days, then rubbing the resulting slurry into the scalp. You're lucky. Your apothecary isn't that adventurous. As you doze off the mixture thickening into a film, you dream of being chased through a monastery by a choir of mice in tiny wigs. Morning arrives and the moment of truth is upon you. You peel off the linen, lean toward the mirror, and examine your scalp. No miracles, no sprouts. Just a faint redness and an expression of mild regret. Back to the apothecary. He's unsurprised. It needs repetition, he says. The hair must be persuaded. So you try again. And again. Over the next week, your routine includes fried mouse massages, daily cool foods, goose fat compresses, and 2 more sips of the dreaded minty wine. You even sit under the moonlight one evening because someone swears lunar exposure helps draw the hair up. You ask around. One merchant claims rubbing bull gallbladder on the scalp worked for him. A passing soldier says his brother's hair grew back after falling into a swamp, but it was probably mold. A tavern maid tells you baldness is just punishment for vanity, which feels uncalled for. In a nearby town, a wealthy noble is said to be using the ashes of black swan's feathers mixed with goat milk. You can't afford that, but the idea that someone's paying a fortune for powdered bird parts makes you feel slightly less absurd. Still, there's no denying it, the mouse cure is the talk of your village now. Even the baker tries it just in case. Suddenly, there's a quiet competition happening who can come up with the strangest, smelliest cure. One guy tries roasted eel skins. Another a poultice of earthworms and pine sap. One daring woman claims her cousin used spiderwebs soaked in vinegar. And it did something, though what exactly remains vague. You start to notice a pattern. Most of these treatments don't work, but people want them to. Because trying something, anything feels better than watching your body unravel without a fight. Historians believe this is where medicine and ritual begin to intertwine. If the science is shaky, at least the action gives you control. The fried mouse becomes more than a salve, it's a symbol of hope. A gooey, pungent, desperate hope. One night as you're preparing your scalp for another dose, you pause. You look at the little jar. The mouse tail pokes out like a tiny, sad garnish. You chuckle, quietly. Then you rub it in anyway. You're getting used to the smell, which is probably not a good thing. By now, your scalp has seen more oil than a medieval frying pan, and your linen wraps have taken on the stiffness of old parchment. But as you sit by the hearth this morning, gently patting down your scalp with rose water, a new suggestion from the butcher's wife, something curious happens. An actual physician is passing through town. He wears a long, dark robe, gloves, and a hat that looks like it lost a fight with a turkey. A leather satchel thumps at his side filled with instruments and mysterious vials. You hear he studied in Salerno, the big-name medical school in Europe, and you decide to pay him a visit. His name is Master Hugo, and he looks very tired. You sit on a stool across from him as he inspects your scalp, with the same look you give your bread when it won't rise. Hair loss, he says, as if you didn't know. Likely due to heat of the liver, poor digestion, and excessive dryness of the cerebral membrane. He pauses. Also, maybe the fried mouse isn't helping. You resist the urge to defend your mouse. Hugo explains that many medieval cures yours included actually come from ancient Roman and Greek sources. The great physicians Galen and Hippocrates wrote about hair loss, though, with mixed levels of success. Galen, for example, thought rubbing onion juice into the scalp could stimulate growth by drawing heat. Hippocrates himself went bald early in life and notably failed to find a cure. That's not a great sign. Still, their writings were treated like gospel for centuries. When the Roman Empire fell and much classical knowledge scattered, monks preserved those texts in monasteries across Europe. Later, Arabic scholars like Avicenna retranslated and expanded on them, introducing new treatments including the use of sandalwood rose oil and even mercury. Historians still argue whether medieval physicians really understood the ancient sources or just copied them out of habit, hoping the magic would stick. Hugo pulls out a small scroll and reads from a Latin text, "Take ashes of lizard burnt whole. Mix with vinegar and apply daily." He rolls it back up without blinking. You ask gently, "Have you tried that one?" "I have," he says. "The vinegar helps, the lizard does not." Over the next hour, he explains the layers of belief surrounding hair and health. Hair loss might be a warning sign of weak blood, of internal dryness, of spiritual decay. It might also reflect your horoscope. Yes, astrology again. He charts your birth sign. Sagittarius. Ruled by Jupiter, he nods. Excess fire. You must cool the system. He prescribes a diet of cold fruits, barley water, and the occasional spoon of cold honey. No spices, no garlic, no wine. He recommends bathing your head in milk twice a week and sleeping with a damp cloth soaked in nettle tea. You're not entirely sure how damp cloths and milk will fix a hot brain, but it still feels more dignified than the mouse paste. Still, you don't throw away your jar, because you're not the only one fighting this uphill battle. Hugo tells you that even Roman emperors worried about baldness. Julius Caesar, famously thin on top, wore a laurel wreath everywhere, partially to look fancy, but mostly to cover his scalp. Emperor Domitian reportedly used all sorts of salves and lotions to reverse his hair loss, none of which worked. Then there's Aristotle, who claimed that men bald because their brain produces too much heat, which burns away the hair. He called baldness a uniquely human tragedy, which is kind of poetic, if completely unhelpful. The problem is, none of this stuff really works. The more you listen, the clearer it becomes. All this ancient wisdom is 90% optimism and 10% onions. Back in your cottage, you try Hugo's milk bath routine. It's cold, sticky, and your scalp now smells like a poorly stored cheese. But you endure. You want results. And then halfway through the week, something changes. Not your hair, sadly, but your outlook. Because you start to realize just how universal this is. Kings, beggars, monks, merchants, everybody loses hair. Some faster than others, some louder about it, but no one escapes it entirely. You even hear of a wealthy merchant in the next town who wears a tiny velvet hat indoors to hide a patchy crown. He claims it's a religious choice. No one believes him. You begin to notice more heads than ever. Patchy crowns under dusty hoods. Receding hairlines below fancy caps. Even Hugo under his odd turkey hat has a thinning strip you didn't notice before. Misery, as they say, loves company. And in medieval Europe, you've got a very well-oiled club of fellow sufferers. That night, you skip the mouse. Just once. You sip a bit of barley water. You look at the stars and wonder if Jupiter really cares about your hairline. Probably not. But tomorrow you'll try the burnt bees, just in case. You wake up in a better mood, which is suspicious. Your scalp smells faintly of barley and goat's milk, and your pillow is only slightly damp and upgrade by medieval standards. Maybe you're adjusting. Maybe you've accepted your fate. Or maybe it's just the excitement of trying something new. Today's treatment burnt bees. You heard about it from a traveling cloth merchant who swore that powdered bees roasted over an open flame until crisp, then ground with a mortar, and pestle could awaken the sleepy roots of the head. The apothecary rolls his eyes when you ask for it, but still produces a tiny cloth pouch from behind a shelf. You're not the first, he mutters. You're a little horrified, a little intrigued. You imagine a group of peasants crouched over a fire toasting bees like marshmallows. But hey, at this point, what's a little bee dust between friends? You mix the ash with olive oil per the instructions and apply it gently to your scalp. The consistency is better than the mouse paste. Less chunky. The smell, earthy. Slightly smoky. Kind of nutty. You don't hate it. While the bee balm sets in, you spend the afternoon people watching in the market square. You've become hyper-aware of hair. Who has it? Who doesn't? Who's trying to cover it? One man has what looks like a wool sock stretched over his head. Another uses a sort of decorative band that does nothing functional but draws the eye upward bold strategy. You realize that even now in the 14th century, barbers play an outsized role in this whole mess. They're part stylist, part surgeon, part therapist. And yes, hair doctor. You make an appointment. Barber Hugo, not to be confused with physician Hugo, is cheerful and only slightly drunk. His workspace smells of ale iron and vague disappointment. He motions you to a chair made from an old church pew and wraps a stained cloth around your neck. I've got a salve, he says. Came from France. Or maybe it was my cousin in France. Either way, tres effective. He slaps something icy on your scalp. It tingles, in a bad way. This is where you learn that barbers in the Middle Ages weren't just snipping ends and trimming beards. They also performed bloodletting tooth extractions, minor surgeries, and in your case applied custom hair salves with alarming enthusiasm. They're red and white striped poles. They symbolize the blood and bandages of their trade. In other words, you're getting medical care from a guy who also sharpens knives for a living. Historians still argue whether barbers were better trusted than physicians or just more accessible. Either way, most townsfolk went to them first. Cheaper, friendlier, and less Latin. Barber Hugo tells you stories while he rubs your scalp. One client swore by bat dung and vinegar. Another swore at him during the treatment. Most of them come back, though, he says proudly. When he's finished, he wraps your head in a warm cloth soaked in rosemary water and tells you to leave it on till sunset. Don't let the chickens peck it, he warns. Happened once. Wasn't pretty. You leave the barber with your scalp steaming gently and your spirits mildly lifted. At this point, you've tried treatments from every social tier monk's physicians, barbers' grannies, and none have produced more than a mild rash and some colorful dreams. Still, there's a strange comfort in the ritual. It feels like progress even if your hairline disagrees. That evening, your neighbor Osric stops by. He's about your age, bald as a polished apple, but he owns it. No ointments, no pace. Just a wool cap and a shrug. You know, he says sometimes I think we're all just smearing things on our heads because we don't want to admit time's moving. You nod slowly. You don't know if he's wise or just lazy, but he's not wrong. You talk for a while, heads gently steaming under the sunset. He tells you about the onion method rubbed raw, soaked in wine. You tell him about the bee dust. You both agree not to try the bat dung. By nightfall, your scalp feels tight but not painful. You unwrap the cloth, check the mirror, and nope. Still bald. But now you smell like a smoked herb garden, so that's something. You fall asleep thinking about how much effort the average person will spend to hold on to something as delicate as utterly pointless in survival terms as hair. And yet it matters. Socially, spiritually, emotionally, in every century it seems. The bees didn't work. The mouse didn't help. The barber's mystery paste just made you tingle. But tomorrow maybe parsley. By now your scalp has endured more medieval recipes than an unlucky roast chicken. And yet this morning you feel something unfamiliar hope. Not the delusional kind that came with the mouse oil or the optimism of the burnt bee paste. No, this is the type of hope that arrives in the form of a whispered rumor carried by a neighbor spoken in reverent tones and wrapped in just enough mystery to sound plausible. There's a holy relic in the next town, and it grows hair. That's what you're told by a traveling monk who stops by your village looking for bread and offering blessings. Between bites, he mentions that in the abbey of St. Wolfram, there's a bone fragment possibly from the saint's toe, possibly from someone less famous that has been known to restore hair to the faithful. You blink. He nods. You must pray. And fast. And anoint your scalp with blessed oil, he says, clearly enjoying the moment. Also, a small donation helps. Naturally, you pack a satchel, tie your sandals, and set off at dawn. The road to St. Wolfram's Abbey is long and uneven, but you make good time driven by the compelling combination of religious fervor and personal vanity. Every step is a reminder that medieval medicine often exists at the hazy border between science and spirituality. You arrive before sunset, dusty, thirsty, and very much still bald. The abbey looms like a stone miracle on a hilltop, surrounded by pilgrims and sheep. Inside, the air is cool and heavy with incense. You approach a glass case near the altar where the relic is displayed, a small, knobby piece of bone resting on red velvet. You're told to kneel. So you do. A monk sprinkles your head with holy water. Another anoints your scalp with oil mixed with thyme and something that smells vaguely like beeswax. You close your eyes. You murmur the required prayers. You place a copper coin in the alms box with a little sigh. The monk pats your shoulder and offers a humble, "The saint may answer." In time. You are not the first to do this, not even the first this week. Throughout the Middle Ages, relics and miracle cures were a thriving industry. Hair loss, along with dozens of other chronic conditions, was seen as something that could be reversed with enough faith and the right relic. Saints' bones, shards of the true cross, even a bishop's thumb preserved in wax. These items drew crowds of desperate souls hoping for divine intervention. Historians still argue whether pilgrims genuinely believed in the power of relics or simply saw them as a last-ditch option when all the snails and roasted mice failed. You sleep in the abbey's guest quarters that night, your scalp lightly glistening with holy oil. The bed is narrow and creaky, but there's a gentle breeze coming through the open window, and a faint sound of chanting in the distance. You drift off to sleep, imagining your hair springing back in thick, poetic curls. Spoiler, it doesn't. You wake up to the sound of a goat somewhere outside and check your reflection in a basin of water. Still shiny, Still saintly, but still bald. On your way out, a kindly nun gives you a small wax tablet. Write your name, she says, and press your thumb into it. Leave it with the relic. Sometimes a saint needs a reminder. You do it, because at this point, why not? The walk back feels longer, heavier. You pass another pilgrim going the opposite way, rubbing his elbow and muttering about holy blister cures. You nod in mutual understanding. It's a shared experience, the great medieval medical lottery. One relic might cure a cough. Another might reverse blindness. And then there's Saint Hairtoe working mysterious wonders on the world's most desperate scalps. You return home sunburned, poorer, and no fuzzier on top. But your neighbor Matilda, remember her, insists you look holier, which is either a compliment or her way of saying you look more pathetic. Hard to tell. She offers you a new remedy, rub your head, with parsley boiled in vinegar and goat dung. You stare at her. She raises her eyebrows. Worked for my cousin. Grew hair on his knuckles, too. You make a polite sound and back away. That evening, as you sit by the fire, still slightly fragrant with thyme oil and disappointment, you think about how much the idea of miracles matters. Whether it's a relic, a potion, or a blessed bandage, there's always a glimmer of hope. And maybe that's the real treatment, believing that healing is possible, even if it never arrives. You look at your little jar of mouse oil, then at the beeswax, then at your now very full collection of magical herbs and ointments. You think of the saint's toe bone nestled in its velvet case, absorbing hundreds of whispered hopes. And you wonder, maybe that's all any of this is. A way to feel slightly less helpless. You wrap your head in rosemary cloth, say a half-hearted prayer, and sleep like a man who's tried everything but still dreams of waking up with bangs. The next morning, you open your eyes to a faint drizzle tapping on the shutters and the sensation of something warm and squishy in your ear. It's parsley. Of course it is. The wrap you wore overnight must have slipped, letting the boiled herbs slide down like some overconfident salad. You sigh gently, fish it out, and toss it into the fire where it sizzles like yesterday's hopes. Because yes, today's remedy is all about peasant medicine. You've been through the monks, the physicians, the barbers. Now you turn to the local experts, the grandmothers, shepherds, and mysterious people who live slightly too far into the woods and have jars of things they won't name. You start with Matilda. She's made you tea. It smells like dandelions, burnt leather, and something alarmingly sweet. Drink up, she says cheerfully. Helps the hair grow in places you didn't even know you had. You take a sip. It's gritty. She sets down a bowl of steaming green paste parsley vinegar and goat dung boiled until it reaches the consistency of despair. She gives you a spoon. It's not for eating, she says scandalized. You rub it on. Every night. Moonlight only. You nod, trying not to breathe too deeply. Out here in the countryside, things aren't based on texts or relics. Remedies are passed by word of mouth or scratched into bits of wood or whispered at harvest festivals. They blend observation with folklore, mixing real plants with questionable logic and a heavy dose of hope. One farmer's wife tells you that rubbing wild mustard into the scalp wakes up the hair. A stable boy says horse sweat helps if collected before dawn and mixed with nettle root. A miller whose own scalp looks like polished wood recommends a mash of barley apple cider and the white part of frog eggs. He won't elaborate. Historians still argue whether these remedies were actually believed or if rural folk knew deep down they were just rituals. The line between medicine and superstition was fine and often blurred on purpose. After all, it's comforting to feel like you're doing something. You try several of them. The parsley and goat dung paste is first. It's warm, surprisingly sticky, and makes your scalp tingle in a way that feels more threatening than healing. You keep the cloth on all night, lying very still so it doesn't slip again. The next day, Matilda offers an onion poultice, this one soaked in beer, and left under the full moon for 3 nights. The moon helps it ferment, she says, winking. Like good cheese, but for your head. You suppress the urge to ask how she knows any of this. There's something charming about peasant cures, though. They're intimate. Homemade. You sit in a smoky kitchen while Matilda hums and stirs her bubbling pot of scalp potion. You help her pick nettles without getting stung. You taste her honey thyme cordial, which probably does nothing for hair, but everything for morale. Plus, these remedies come with stories. Did I ever tell you about my great-uncle Harold? She says one afternoon while painting your scalp with mint-infused lard. Went bald at 20. Drank a whole jar of pickled garlic in one go. Didn't grow hair, but his breath scared off a bear. You laugh, carefully, because your head is slippery. And then there's the neighbor boy about 10 years old who insists his pet goose once laid an egg on his dad's bald spot. And now the man has a full head of curls. It was warm, he explains seriously. The warmth woke the hair. You don't try this one, yet. But it's not just fun and folk tales. The underlying wisdom is sometimes startling. Parsley is rich in nutrients. Nettles reduce inflammation. Apple cider vinegar can improve circulation. These people may not talk in terms of cells or follicles, but their intuition often leads them to ingredients that, by sheer accident or tradition, actually do something. Of course, they also believe sneezing while walking under a ladder can curse your hairline for 7 years, so there's a balance. That night, after rubbing in a vinegar parsley blend, so potent it makes your eyes water, you sit outside under the stars. You feel silly, you feel hopeful. You feel like maybe you'll wake up with a few new strands to show for it. Instead, you wake up with ants on your head. Turns out goat dung and vinegar is popular with the local insect population. You fling off the wrap, slap gently at your scalp, and rush outside cursing softly under your breath. Matilda watches from her window sipping tea. Means it's working, she says. Sure it does. Later you rinse off in the stream and decide to take a day off. No paste, no prayer, no onions. Just your normal, shiny, slightly irritated scalp. And you realize something. You're still you. Hair or not. You haven't given up. Not yet. But you're learning to live with the slow, ridiculous, very human nature of trying. You pass the baker. He nods at your bald spot. Looking shinier, he says like, that's a compliment. You smile, you keep walking. Tomorrow you'll try the wild mustard. You're starting to develop what can only be described as a routine. It's not the sort of routine anyone dreams of as a child. You never imagined your future would include scraping mustard seeds into a bowl at sunrise, while avoiding the judgmental gaze of a neighbor's goose. But here you are. Wild mustard, they say, stimulates the scalp. Matilda says it punches the follicles awake. The apothecary says it causes irritation, which can be mistaken for progress. You say nothing because your head is already burning slightly, and you'd like to believe it's a sign of miracles to come. You mix the mustard with vinegar and a dash of rosemary oil because at this point, why not? And apply it generously to your scalp. It stings, but in a lively way. The kind of sting that makes you sit up straighter and blink a lot. Definitely not a soothing mask. This is a wake-up call in paste form. You wrap your head in a linen cloth soaked in cold barley water to temper the burn and lie back on your cot, hoping the combination won't cause spontaneous combustion. Your scalp now smells like a pickle jar that's been left in the sun too long, as you rest your thoughts drift toward the larger world. Because baldness isn't just your problem, it's a global, timeless condition. And people everywhere have tried to fix it in strange and wonderful ways. Take India, for instance. Ancient Ayurvedic texts recommended massaging the scalp with a mix of coconut oil, hibiscus flowers, and brahmi meant to cool the body and nourish the prana or life force. In China, traditional medicine leaned on ginseng, black sesame, and acupuncture. Meanwhile, Viking Age remedies included rubbing goose grease into the scalp while chanting to the gods. You're tempted to try this one, just for the chanting. The humor theory may have dominated Europe, but across the world, other systems emerged each with their own logic, rituals, and recipes. Yet nearly all of them shared one thing in common. They linked hair with vitality. Historians still argue whether these treatments were purely medicinal or served deeper psychological or spiritual functions. After all, hair is the one part of you that grows outside the body. It becomes a marker of identity pride and, if you're unlucky, loss. Back in your village, you start noticing people who never seemed bothered before. Osric, for example, he of the wool hat, and Zen attitude has started asking subtle questions. You still using the parsley? Or did the mustard win, he mutters while pretending to shop for onions. You grin. You know the signs. Even Matilda, who's always worn her hair in a tightly wound bun, confesses that she once tried rubbing the sap of a birch tree into her scalp after a particularly brutal winter. didn't work, she says, but my pillow smelled like a forest for days. It's oddly comforting. This collective sense of trying, failing, and trying again. You start thinking of yourself not as a single desperate scalp, but as part of a bald brotherhood. Quiet, stubborn, slightly flammable. And there's progress too. Not on your head, but in your mindset. You no longer expect overnight transformation. You no longer stare at your reflection, willing new strands to sprout like miracle wheat. You've moved into a new phase curiosity. What else did people try? What hasn't made its way into your bizarre catalog of folk and formal cures? So you start asking around. A traveling scholar tells you of a Saxon remedy involving cow urine and pigeon droppings. You pretend to write it down but do not. A wandering minstrel claims rubbing garlic and honey on the scalp under a lunar eclipse will yield surprising tufts. You ask surprising good or surprising awful, he winks. Someone suggests powdered snail shells again this time, baked into bread and eaten on Wednesdays only. The lines between medicine ritual and full-blown performance art begin to blur. You begin keeping a little journal, not a formal diary, just scratched notes and drawings of plant spices and concoctions. Little notes like nettle plus vinegar, heaters, itchy but hopeful. Snail shell smells worse when wet. Burnt bee dust oddly nostalgic. There's a kind of joy in it now. A game almost. You're no longer just trying to fix yourself. You're exploring a cultural heritage of coping the long, strange legacy of humans, trying to control what nature gently, cruelly takes away. And every night as you wrap your scalp in the newest blend of herbs and oils, you lie back and think of the ancient world. Of a Roman soldier dabbing honey on his temples. Of an Egyptian priest grinding up date pits beside a golden shrine. Of a 12th century monk scribbling down a new recipe for baldness, boil rose water, and sheep's spleen. You're a part of a long line of hopeful heads. Tonight you add a pinch of thyme to the mustard paste because it smells nicer and because maybe, just maybe, thyme is the missing piece. You sleep beneath the stars, scalp tingling linen wrap, slightly askew and a faint smile on your face. Tomorrow garlic and honey, eclipse optional. You rise before the sun groggy with a vague memory of dreaming that your pillow grew hair before you did. The wrap is still in place miraculously, and the mustard thyme blend has cooled into something resembling the crust on an overbaked loaf of bread. You peel it off slowly. There's a faint red patch where the mustard's enthusiasm got the better of your scalp. No hair yet, but the smell is herbal, bracing. You feel like a very confused roast chicken. Today is garlic and honey day. Matilda says it's a warming recipe, but not the dangerous kind. It's supposed to coax the blood to the scalp, like a bee to a blossom. You try not to imagine bees swarming your bald patch. The honey you have, it's thick and dark and smells like wildflowers and sweat. The garlic takes more effort. You smash it with a stone, mix it into the honey until it forms a paste with all the charm of medieval toothpaste, and apply it gently, lovingly to your dome. It's sticky, very sticky. You sit in the sun to let it set, which seems counterintuitive for a warming paste, but tradition's tradition. And while it soaks in, you think again about just how many people have offered advice. Because hair loss is one of those rare unifiers, it hits peasants, priests, nobles, and nuns alike. Even kings weren't safe. You remember a story about King Henry III of England, who wore elaborate hoods not for fashion, but to cover his ever-expanding bald spot. And Charlemagne. Yes, that Charlemagne supposedly asked his personal physicians to develop a tonic for his thinning crown. Their answer? A mix of wine, rosemary, and dried lizard. Rosemary. You're not shocked. Historians still argue whether these royal cures were taken seriously, or if they served as a kind of ceremonial placebo. After all, what servant would dare tell a king his scalp still looked like a peeled onion? As the garlic honey paste hardens into a sugary armor, you realize this hair isn't just a medical issue. It's a performance of identity. In a world where your status is often judged by your clothes, teeth posture, and yes, hairline baldness, becomes a kind of public confession. A visible failure to maintain divine balance. So it's no wonder kings commission cures. No wonder monks lit candles to St. Wolfram. No wonder your neighbor once chased a squirrel off his head, hoping it would bless him. That didn't work. It bit him. You begin to wonder how much modern people would relate. Would a medieval barbershop feel so different from one today? Picture it: two men seated, one discussing. Nettle compresses, the other skeptical. You gotta try the goat fat blend, one says. Works wonders. My cousin's hairline came back and so did his marriage. Meanwhile, the barber's just nodding, grinding herbs with one hand and sharpening lease jars with the other. But this garlic honey thing, there's something oddly pleasant about it. Yes, your scalp feels like a fly trap. Yes, you're slightly worried about ants again. But the smell is warm, familiar. Homey. It reminds you of meals, of kitchens, of moments when things didn't feel quite so fragile. Because that's what this whole journey has been: a long, sticky, spicy, sometimes burny pilgrimage through the many ways people cope with change. Not just physical change, but symbolic. When your hair disappears, it's a sign of age, of stress, of loss. And people don't like signs they didn't ask for. You gently pat your scalp with a cool cloth. The stickiness resists, but eventually gives way. You check the mirror, same scalp, a little redder, slightly shinier, but you're not disappointed. Not anymore. Now it's a game. A habit. A story you're living in one application at a time. That afternoon, you head into town for fresh rosemary and maybe some licorice root. Matilda heard it pleases the blood. On your way, you pass Osric, who's fashioned himself a crown of woven grass. For airflow, he says seriously. You nod solemnly. At the apothecary, you overhear two men arguing about eel grease versus walnut oil. One claims eel grease woke his head up like a morning trumpet. The other swears by walnuts because squirrels have full, fluffy tails. This passes for logic. You buy both, just in case. You return home with a pouch of herbal optimism and a mind full of possibility. This evening, you'll try a walnut and honey rub with just a hint of eel grease on the temples. You're not sure why the temples, but it feels scientific. The wind is soft tonight. You light a candle, mash your mixture together, and begin the ritual. You hum to yourself. You feel a little ridiculous, but you also feel comforted. Because here's the thing, you may still be bald. But you've become a connoisseur of cures, a collector of folklore, a living library of what people will do to try and slow down time. And even if the hair never comes back, the stories certainly will. Tomorrow, rosewater and licorice? Maybe something with snails again. You're ready. You begin the morning with optimism and a faint sheen of walnut oil still clinging to your temples. The scent is pleasant, almost festive, and for a moment you pretend your scalp is a small, well-oiled walnut loaf waiting to rise. Today's remedy comes with a certain elegance: rosewater and licorice. After yesterday's garlic stickiness and the eel grease experiment that left your dog following you around like you were a snack, you're ready for something gentler, something floral, less alarming. Matilda helps you boil the licorice root into a dark syrup. It sweetens the blood, she says, handing you a spoon to stir. And the rosewater calms the spirit. A happy scalp grows hair. She winks because that sounds suspiciously like nonsense, but also exactly the kind of nonsense you've come to adore. Once cooled, you mix the syrup with rosewater until it smells like a medieval candy shop, sweet, heady, and faintly medicinal. You dip a strip of linen into the mixture and gently wrap it around your head, tying it under your chin like a very pious bonnet. Then you wait. And as always, while you wait, you think. About how far you've come. About the layers of cures you've endured. And about the peculiar human need to treat the body not just with science, but with ceremony. Because that's what this has become. Not just a treatment plan, but a daily act of devotion. Like lighting a candle. Or saying a prayer. Except instead of incense, it's onions. And instead of salvation, it's the faint hope of sideburns. In many ways, your ritual would be familiar to medieval mystics, those holy men and women who believed that physical affliction was a sign of spiritual imbalance. Some of them treated illness with herbs, yes, but also with prayer, fasting, and symbolic acts. You've fasted accidentally while steeping bee powder. You've prayed mostly for it all to wash out. And you've certainly performed more than a few symbolic acts. Like rubbing wild mustard on your crown under a full moon while humming the litany of St. Baldric. Yes, that really happened. Historians still argue whether mystics saw these rituals as healing, or as a form of self-discipline, a way to reconnect with something bigger than the body. But in your case, it's something simpler: control. Because when you lose your hair, you lose a little more than follicles. You lose a bit of predictability, of youth, of vanity, and doing something absurd gives you a sense that you're still steering the ship, even if it's sailing straight into nonsense. This evening, as you unwrap the linen, your scalp feels cool and soft. No tingling, no burning, no new hair, but also no ants or unexpected textures. A win! You go for a walk around the village. It's a warm night and the stars are out. The constellations glimmer overhead like they're trying to form a recipe of their own. You pass Osric, who's now tried covering his head with damp moss. It's very calming, he says. His hat drips slightly. You nod, impressed by his commitment. At the tavern, you overhear two farmers debating boar fat as a hair treatment. One claims it must be taken from a left-footed pig, hard to verify, while the other insists it only works during Lent. You write both down in your little journal with a sigh and a smile, and suddenly you realize no one's laughing at you anymore. Because they're all doing it. Your quest. What once felt lonely, embarrassing, even ridiculous, has become a kind of community experiment. People swap recipes. They compare tingles. There's a man down the road who swears his wife's fermented turnip cream moved something. You're a trendsetter, a pioneer in the frontier of greasy scalp science. You return home to find Matilda placing rose petals on her windowsill. To dry, she says, and for scent. You've made the whole cottage smell like a love letter. You lie down scalp clean, hairless, and thoroughly pampered. There's a kind of peace in it, because even if nothing's growing yet, you've stopped chasing the miracle. You've started enjoying the process, the quiet repetition, the tiny hopefulness of it all. Tomorrow, someone promises a recipe involving caraway seeds and ox bile. You're not excited, but you'll try it. Because why stop now? The caraway seeds arrive wrapped in a scrap of old prayer parchment, which feels either deeply respectful or mildly sacrilegious. You're not sure which. You thank the courier, tuck the parchment into your pocket for good luck, and stare at the tiny brown seeds that allegedly, when boiled in ox bile, will reawaken the dormant roots of manhood. You try not to think too hard about what that means. Acquiring ox bile is trickier. You eventually strike a deal with the village butcher, who agrees to provide a ladle's worth from his next slaughter, but only if you promise to keep quiet about the time he tried mashed leeks and beer on his mustache and ended up looking like a sad turnip for a month. Fair trade. The bile arrives greenish and far too warm. It smells like a mixture of regret and punishment. You hold your breath, boil the caraway seeds in it with a dash of vinegar, and stir the mixture until it forms a thick, viscous liquid that clings to the spoon like treacle from some vengeful underworld. You apply it with a brush made from horsehair. The sensation is sharp, like your scalp knows this is one step too far. You persevere. You've done worse. There was bee ash, remember? And as it sets, you sit quietly in your garden, letting the breeze carry away the stronger notes of ox. You sip barley water and think again about the idea of rootedness. Hair in the Middle Ages was more than just decoration, it was symbolic. Of strength, of virility, of divine favor. Knights prayed for thick beards before battle. Priests shaved their crowns in signs of humility, but still fretted if the remaining fringe began to vanish. Even saints were known for their locks. Catherine of Siena's was described as golden and unshorn. Losing hair meant losing favor. A thinning crown could look like a failing soul, and yet you remind yourself it's also just hair. Historians still argue whether medieval people truly believed in the spiritual significance of baldness, or whether it was one of many excuses people used to avoid confronting their own aging. After all, it's easier to blame hot bile or a curse from an ill-tempered goat than to admit your body simply moves forward whether you want it to or not. You think of that poor nobleman who allegedly wore a blonde horsehair wig during feast days and prayed no one would notice when it slipped sideways during a toast. You feel for him. You'd have done the same. Matilda stops by with a little clay pot of her own invention soot and elderberry mash. She tells you she's using it on her elbows, no reason given. You trade notes. She raises an eyebrow at the bile. You always were ambitious, she mutters, sniffing the air. That night, your scalp feels like it's being mildly interrogated. You try to sleep on your side to avoid smearing ox bile into your pillow, but the wrap shifts and you wake up with your cheek stuck to the linen like a medieval fruit roll-up. You rinse your head in the stream. Even the frogs look offended, but you're not disappointed. You've grown used to the failure. Or maybe failure no longer feels like the right word. This isn't failure, it's research. And like any good scholar of medieval nonsense, you keep going. By now, you've become the village's official bald oracle. People drop off herbs on your doorstep. Dried flowers. Notes written in smudged charcoal. Have you tried rat tail vinegar? My uncle says lichen from north-facing trees works best. Saw a monk with thick curls. Asked his secret. He just laughed and disappeared into the woods. You've even had a request for advice. A merchant's son. 17, anxious with a little thinning patch near his forehead. You give him a simple balm rosemary and goose fat, and tell him to wear it with confidence. You don't mention the bile. Not yet. That's for advanced practitioners. The boy thanks you with a look of reverence, and for a moment you feel like you've passed through some invisible threshold. You're not chasing the cure anymore, you're curating the experience. Like some oily, itchy, slightly fragrant wizard of the scalp. That evening you sit beside your small hearth and reapply a milder blend, just rose oil and thyme, and let the warmth of the fire seep through the bandage. You reflect on how hair in all its forms has been a source of identity throughout the ages. The Vikings braided theirs with bone beads. The nobles powdered theirs white with scented chalk. The monks shaved theirs as penance. The peasants tied theirs back with string or let it fall naturally unbothered by trends. And yet they all feared its loss, as do you, but less now. Tomorrow you'll try lichen from the north side of an oak tree mixed with egg yolk and elder sap. A gift from Matilda who says it's for closure, or maybe just for fun. You accept both. The lichen is soft and pale green, curling in delicate tendrils across the shady side of the village's oldest oak. You pluck it carefully, Matilda said. North-facing only, and though you don't know why, you've learned not to question her forest logic. You gather it into a little cloth pouch and cradle it like treasure. Back at your cottage, you add a fresh egg yolk still warm from the hen, and a spoonful of elder sap that drips from a jar Matilda gave you with strict instructions. Don't sniff it too hard. It bites, you take her word for it. The mixture becomes thick, yellowish, and sticky. Again. Somehow every cure has the consistency of porridge or punishment. You apply it slowly, the lichen clinging to your scalp like moss on a stone. It feels cool, not unpleasant. You wrap your head, sit by the hearth, and exhale. This one isn't just a treatment, it's an offering. You think about how many centuries people have done this, sat applied things to their skin or hair or hearts, and hoped the world might answer back. Even when they didn't know the chemistry. Even when the ingredients came from superstition or sheer desperation. Because beneath all the soot and sap and garlic, there's one universal truth: people want to be whole again. You remember hearing once about Pliny the Elder, that ever-curious Roman encyclopedist who recommended a hair growth salve made from ashes of deer antler wine and bear grease. Another of his suggestions, applying the burnt genitals of a hedgehog. You shudder not because of the image, though, yes, but because you understand. He wasn't trying to be cruel. He was documenting everything anyone ever tried, no matter how bizarre, because somewhere deep inside, people feared the symbol of decay that came with balding. Historians still argue whether Roman remedies were more scientific than medieval ones, or just written in fancier Latin. Pliny certainly didn't test everything himself. You, on the other hand, are living the dream, or the delusion. Either way, you've become part of the ongoing experiment. The egg and lichen mask hardens into something like old paint. You peel it off carefully after sunset and inspect your scalp. It's still as bare as your breakfast bowl, but the skin feels smooth. Clean. Almost like it's been told a secret. Later that evening, Matilda visits with a small loaf of sweetbread and a gift, a carved wooden comb, smooth and polished. No reason, she says, handing it over, but maybe someday. You run your fingers across the teeth of the comb and smile. It's absurd, beautiful, kind. The truth is, no one remembers when your cure tour became something of a village project. When the laughing stopped, and the quiet support began. When people stopped expecting results and started sharing stories instead. You think of the elderly woman who told you with a twinkle in her eye that her late husband swore by nettles soaked in ale, but never used it himself, just liked the smell. Of the carpenter who wears a wig made from horsehair, not out of vanity, but because my wife likes to braid it when she's nervous. Of the traveling trader who admitted he used to chase cures but now shaves his head daily for the shine. You're not alone. You never were. There's comfort in knowing that people have always found ways to fill the gap between what's lost and what remains. Between what was once growing and what now simply is. That night, you take a moment to comb the side of your head where a few brave hairs still exist. You hum to yourself. The comb glides smoothly, no tangles. Of course not, but it feels good. You wrap your scalp in a simple cloth soaked with chamomile and lay down early the fire, crackling softly, the bread on the table still warm. No treatment tonight, just rest. Tomorrow maybe nettles an ale, or maybe not. Maybe it's enough just to sit in the garden, drink tea, and let the breeze ruffle the hair you imagine you might one day have again. The sun creeps in through the shutters soft and golden, and you rise slowly, no potions, no concoctions, no smell of onions or vinegar clinging to your pillow. Just morning, quiet, simple. You stretch, run your hand over your scalp, habit now more than hope, and pause. Still smooth, a little dry. Maybe from yesterday's lichen, maybe just the way things are. You smile anyway. Matilda arrives with a pouch of dried nettle leaves, her fingers already red from plucking. Fresh is best, but dried'll do. She says, dumping them onto your table like a dealer of leafy promises. Boil them in ale, let them steep, and sip a bit before rubbing the rest on your head. Good inside and out. You begin the ritual together. She stirs. You hum. The scent of barley and earth fills the cottage. The concoction turns a cloudy amber green, somewhere between a health tonic and a bad decision. While it cools, you sip a little from a wooden cup. Bitter. Grassy. Tastes like guilt, you say. Matilda grins. That means it's working. You soak a cloth in the nettle ale, wring it out, and wrap it around your head. It's warm. The kind of warm that makes you feel like you've been gently insulted by a hot towel. You lie back breathing in the steam and drift toward memory. You remember your first attempt mice, wasn't it? Fried, then crushed, you were so serious, so eager. You remember thinking, this will work. This will be the one. It wasn't, but maybe that wasn't the point. As the nettle wrap settles into your skin, you reflect on something deeper. You've moved beyond cure into acceptance. Not surrender exactly. More like a nod to reality. A handshake with fate. You no longer dream of waking up with curls. Now you dream of waking up rested, perhaps with the scent of rosemary still lingering in your sheets. Hair has become optional, and in a strange way that freedom makes you braver. You think about the monks of Cluny who shaved their heads as a sign of humility, of turning away from vanity. About the warriors of Japan who tied their hair into precise top knots and viewed baldness as a loss of status. About the African kings who wove hair into ceremonial headdresses and passed them down like crowns. Hair has always been a symbol of power, of piety, of rebellion. But symbols change, and so can you. Historians still argue whether baldness was truly feared or just inconvenient in a world where social identity was painted right onto your scalp. But one thing they agree on, it was always personal. Deeply, frustratingly, wonderfully personal. Matilda brews a pot of tea while you rest. The scent of chamomile and nettle mixes in the air, and for once your head doesn't itch or tingle or feel like it's about to ignite. It just feels like yours. Later you unwrap the cloth. Your scalp is pink and warm and very slightly sticky, but it smells good. Clean. Earthy. You pat it dry with a soft towel and catch your reflection in the window pane. You don't wince. You don't sigh. You nod. Then you take the leftover nettle ale and pour it around the base of your garden's rosemary bush. Just in case you whisper. That evening the tavern is unusually full. Word's gotten out about your cure collection. Someone's posted a sign outside the Bald Prophet welcomes you. Donations encouraged hair optional. You glare at Matilda. She just laughs. Inside, villagers trade stories like currency. One man swears his grandfather grew a mustache after sleeping on a haystack, blessed by a goat. A woman swears by pickle juice and thyme, but only during eclipses. A merchant offers to pay you in smoked herring if you'll make him a custom scalp oil. You accept, because this isn't about you anymore. It's about everyone who's ever tried something ridiculous in the name of hope. About the shared absurdity of being human. of wanting something back, not because it defines you, but because it reminds you that you used to have it. So you take notes. You nod, you smile, you stir new things into new jars and pass them around. Hair or not, you've become something you never expected. The keeper of lost causes. And it's kind of beautiful. The next morning, you wake to birdsong and the distant sound of someone loudly arguing about horseradish. You roll over, press a hand to your scalp. It's warm, a little oily from last night's herring-scented experiment. But no new forests have bloomed overnight. You don't mind. In fact, you find yourself humming as you rinse your head in a bowl of lavender water and lemon balm, not because it's meant to grow hair, but because it smells nice. The old urgency has melted into ritual. You do these things now, not just in hopes of a miracle, but because they make you feel cared for. Even if the only one doing the caring is you. Matilda arrives late in the morning with something new fermented cabbage water. Very good for the scalp, she says, nose wrinkling. Also good for pickling enemies. You sip it cautiously. It tastes like if vinegar had second thoughts. Still, you soak a cloth in it, wrap your head and sit in the garden as the cabbage juice trickles slowly down your neck. You've had worse. A young girl from the next village stops by shyly. She's brought you a drawing of you, bald and smiling with herbs in your pockets and what might be a ferret on your shoulder. Mama says you help people feel better, she whispers, even if they still look funny. You laugh gently. Fair enough. You hang the drawing in your cottage. By midday, the tavern sends a small barrel of ale labeled, "For external use only." A joke, maybe, or not. You consider soaking your feet in it. Your scalp deserves a break. That afternoon, as you collect dried thyme and chamomile blossoms, you think about how this all began with a fried mouse, some very bad decisions, and a desperate urge to fix something unfixable. You were focused on restoration, on undoing what time had done. But now you understand healing isn't always about reversing. Sometimes it's about adapting, about making peace. You pass Osric on the road. He's wearing a crown of woven onion skins now. They repel curses, he explains solemnly. You nod like that makes perfect sense. He pats your scalp and says, "You're looking bold today." Not bald, bold. You grin. Historians still argue whether medieval people believed more in the cures or the community those cures created. Because a tincture, after all, is just a mixture of ingredients. But sharing a tincture, trying it together, failing together, that creates something richer. You realize you've built more than a record of bizarre recipes. You've built a fellowship. One built on balm and bonkers ideas. One that says, yes, let's rub goose fat on our heads and see what happens. And when it doesn't work, let's laugh and do it again tomorrow with fennel instead. You spend the evening writing down everything you've learned. Not in a neat scroll, but in your weathered little journal, its pages stained with thyme oil and mystery goo. You title the newest page Truths I Know and jot. Hope is sticky. Garlic is powerful. Baldness does not mean brokenness. Matilda is always right. Some cures only work if you believe they will. Most don't. That's fine. The stars come out slowly, peeking through the dark like shy dinner guests. You sit by the fire, brushing your smooth scalp with Matilda's wooden comb, not to untangle, but to feel the shape of you. You are no longer waiting for change. Tomorrow you'll try a sage and beeswax balm, just because, not to grow anything, just to soothe. You wake up with beeswax stuck to your pillow. Apparently the sage and wax balm works a little too well at room temperature. And while your scalp feels luxuriously soft, your sheets now smell faintly of a candle factory that's lost its way. You laugh softly and make a mental note to sleep with a towel tonight. No panic, no rushing to the mirror, no wild hopes, just another day. You stir porridge, gently warm a cloth infused with rose and elderflower, and set it aside for later. Your scalp routine has become less about expectation and more like a tea ceremony of the head. A quiet, steady ritual that gives shape to your mornings. Outside the garden buzzes with late summer bees. The rosemary's gone wild and the thyme creeps like a soft green beard across the stepping stones. You sit in the sunlight sipping barley tea, head-wrapped heart, unbothered. Later, a boy from the village runs up with a gift, a small pouch of crushed walnut shells and a note scrawled in charcoal. From my uncle. Said it didn't work, but it smells like success. You smile, tuck it into your herb drawer, and add it to your ever-growing collection of failures that almost feel like victories. Because each remedy, each ridiculous mixture, each time you've rubbed bad ideas onto your poor patient's scalp, it all tells a story. A story of care, of effort, of refusing to surrender without at least one attempt involving fermented honey and 2 full moons. You think again of the ancient ones, the Egyptians with their crushed dates and lion fat. The Greeks who believed in hot oils and cold logic. The medieval apothecaries carefully measuring out snail ash with one hand and a prayer with the other. Historians still argue whether all this alchemical hair magic was a sincere form of medicine, or simply an expression of helplessness dressed in herbs. Maybe it was both. You've come to believe that most things are. This evening you hold a small scalp symposium in the garden. 3 neighbors bring their most recent attempts. Osric, now wearing a hat made from dandelions, reveals a blend of mint and bad cider. Matilda brings boiled thistle and honey, though she admits she just likes the color. A young woman named Tilda quietly places a jar labeled just rainwater. Blessed twice. You go first, applying a mix of warmed basil oil and rosemary vinegar. It stings a little, but you barely flinch. You're a professional now. Everyone takes turns. There is laughter, there is advice, there is more laughter. It doesn't matter that no one's growing anything. The rituals matter more than the results. As the stars begin to prick the sky and the fireflies rise lazily from the grass, you lean back in your chair and look at your companions. Fellow pilgrims on the absurd journey of trying, of caring, of believing. If only for a little while that the right combination of plants and prayer might reverse the inevitable. You gently remove the wrap from your head. Still bare, still smooth, still you. And that's enough. Now, as the night folds itself gently around your cottage, you blow out the candle, rinse your scalp one last time with cold lavender water, and lie down wrapped in silence, scented with basil. Your little journal open on the table beside you. The final entry simply reads, Day 143, no hair, lots of stories, good trade. The fire dims. The garden hushes. You drift. And now you rest. The herbs have been set aside, the fire's glow softens into shadow, and the house has grown still. You lie there quietly, your head resting on a cool pillow. The scent of rosemary and rosewater lingering in the air like a friendly ghost from an earlier dream. Outside, the crickets sing their steady lullaby. The wind rustles through the garden, brushing against thyme and mint, whispering soft promises to every sleeping leaf. It's the kind of night that asks nothing of you, only that you breathe slowly, gently, and let go. You've traveled through centuries tonight. Walked alongside monks and kings, pot stirrers and poets. You've crushed herbs' boiled roots and rubbed mixtures onto your scalp that would send even the boldest modern dermatologist into retreat. But you did it all with heart, with hope, with humor, and that hope, that soft, persistent human hope, is still with you. So now let it rest. Let your scalp be still. Let your mind unclench. You've earned a night with no experiments, no tingles, no vinegar stings. Just quiet. Just peace. Just the gentle rhythm of a body winding down. In this moment you are whole, hair or not, follicles or none. You are part of a long, strange, beautiful tradition of people who tried. And trying is enough. Close your eyes. Let the silence settle. Let the dreams come.
you.